The village of Thornwall, nestled in the valley like a frightened child. Its thatched roofs and smoking chimneys dwarfed by the ancient forest that surrounded it. On nights when the moon hung full and swollen, no villager dared venture beyond their doorsteps, for those were the nights when Queen Cash's carriage would glide through the mist. 5-year-old Benio stood by the forge, watching his father hammer glowing metal into shape. The rhythmic clanging had been his lullaby since birth, the smell of hot iron and coal, his constant companion. Unlike other children who cowered at tales of the vampire queen, Benio was fascinated. He had seen her once when her carriage passed through the village square. A fleeting glimpse of fiery hair and alabaster skin that haunted his dreams. "Father, will the queen come tonight?" he asked, his small fingers tracing patterns in the soot that covered the workbench. Henrik the blacksmith looked up, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Aye, the blood moon rises, but you'll stay inside, boy. The queen's entourage brings nothing but death. But she's beautiful," Benio whispered. His father's hammer struck with unexpected force. "Beauty is the devil's trap, son. The queen feeds on beauty before she drains it away. Remember your mother." Benio lowered his gaze. He had never known his mother, only that she had died the night of his birth, when the queen's carriage had last passed through Thornwall. As darkness fell, the village grew silent. Doors were barred, windows shuttered, prayers whispered. But Benio slipped away while his father dozed by the cooling forge. He carried with him a small token, a crude iron rose he had secretly shaped during his father's absences. A childish imitation of the metalwork that decorated the queen's carriage. The cobblestone road gleamed silver in the moonlight. Benio positioned himself at the village edge, where the road curved past the ancient oak that marked the boundary between the mortal world and the wild lands beyond. Then he waited. The iron rose clutched in his small soot-stained hand. He felt them before he saw them. A chill that swept through the air, causing the leaves to shiver. Then came the sound, the soft, almost silent tread of hooves that made no natural noise against stone. From the mist emerged 4 midnight black horses, their eyes glowing like embers, vapor curling from their flared nostrils. They pulled a carriage of ebony and silver, ornate and terrifying, windows draped with crimson velvet. Benito stood his ground, heart hammering against his ribs. The carriage slowed as it approached, the horses snorting as they sensed mortal blood. A pale hand parted the curtain, and then she was there. Queen Kaseyaya, the immortal ruler of the night, whose beauty was like a knife to the heart. Her hair cascaded in waves of deep crimson, framing a face of such perfect symmetry, it seemed carved from marble by divine hands. But it was her eyes that captured Benicio, red as freshly spilled blood, ancient and knowing. The queen's gaze fell upon the small figure by the roadside, and curiosity flickered across her ageless features. She raised one elegant hand and the carriage halted. "What brave little mortal dares to stand in my bath?" Her voice was like honey poured over ice, sweet and cold at once. Benio swallowed hard. "I'm Benio, son of Henrik the blacksmith, your majesty." He stepped forward, offering the iron rose with trembling fingers. "I made this for you." A hush fell over the night. The queen's guards, pale creatures with predatory eyes, shifted restlessly, but Kasha raised a hand to still them. She leaned closer, the scent of ancient roses and copper surrounding her. "A blacksmith's boy," she mused, taking the crude rose between 2 slender fingers. "Do you not fear me, child? Do you not know what I am?" "You're the queen," Benio said simply, "and the most beautiful lady in all the world." A smile played at the corners of Kasha's crimson lips, revealing the faintest hint of fangs. "Beauty is fleeting, little one. Even mine has its price." She studied the iron rose. "What payment do you seek for this gift?" Benio's eyes shone with innocent determination. "When I grow up, I'll be your husband," he declared. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Kasha laughed, the sound like silver bells in the night echoing through the trees and sending shivers down the spines of villagers hiding behind their doors. "Oh, little one," she said, amusement dancing in her blood-red eyes. "The world will swallow you long before it ever reaches my heart." She tucked the iron rose into her bodice near where a heart should beat. "But I shall keep your gift, for it amuses me." As the carriage began to move again, Kasha's gaze lingered on the boy. "Live well, Benio of Thornwall. Grow strong. Dream your mortal dreams. By the time you are a man, I shall have forgotten your face." But as the mist swallowed her carriage and the sound of hooves faded into the night, Benio stood resolute. "I won't forget yours, my queen," he whispered, "and I will return." Unknown to the boy, as the carriage disappeared into the darkness, Queen Kasha held the iron rose between her pale fingers once more, a strange expression crossing her timeless face. For a brief moment, something stirred within her, a memory of humanity, long buried beneath centuries of blood and shadow. "Such a curious child," she murmured to herself. "A pity mortals burned so quickly." In the distance, wolves began to howl, announcing the hunt that would follow the queen's passage. But for the first time in centuries, Kaja commanded her guards to spare the village that night. A small mercy, perhaps, or merely the whim of an immortal queen touched by a mortal's innocent devotion. If you're enjoying the story, take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment. And so began the tale of Benio and the Vampire Queen, a story of devotion and darkness that would echo through the shadowed valleys of that forgotten realm for generations to come. 15 years passed, like shadows across the face of the moon. Thornwall changed little, but Benio grew from a soot-stained child into a young man whose hands could bend metal to his will, just as his father had before him. Henrik had passed during a harsh winter 3 years prior, leaving Benio alone with the forge and the memories that haunted its stone walls. The visits of Queen Kaja's carriage had grown less frequent over the years, but the tales of her realm spread like wildfire through the countryside. Stories spoke of her castle nestled in the Carpathian peaks, where gargoyles with living eyes watched from every tower. Whispers told of great halls where blood flowed like wine, and courtiers who had not drawn breath in centuries danced until dawn. Most fearsome were the tales of her throne room, where the floors were said to be stained with the vite of 1,000 enemies, and mirrors were forbidden lest they reveal the emptiness where her reflection should be. Benio absorbed these stories like metal absorbs heat, his childhood fascination hardening into something deeper, an obsession tempered by time. "You still dream of her, don't you?" Old Magda asked one evening as Benio delivered newly forged hinges for her door. The crone was the village wise woman, her eyes clouded with cataracts, but seeing far more than most. Benio merely nodded, knowing denial was pointless. "The Nosratu are not to be loved, boy," she warned, her gnarled fingers tracing ancient symbols in the air between them. "Their kiss brings only darkness. Their love is possession. Their eternity is damnation." "I made her a promise," Benio replied simply. Magda spat on the ground. "A child's folly. She has drunk the lifeblood of kings and emperors. What could a blacksmith offer the Queen of Night?" That question haunted Benio as he worked late into the evening, hammer striking against a blade unlike any he had forged before. For years he had been perfecting his craft, studying with every mastermith who passed through the region. But this sword was different. Its metal a strange alloy of silver and steel. Its hilt wrapped in leather tanned from a bull sacrificed under the full moon as Magda had instructed. A blade to cut through shadow itself, the old woman had whispered, pressing a vial of clear liquid into his hand. "Temper it with holy water, anoint it with garlic oil, and no creature of the night will stand before it." Yet Benio had no intention of slaying vampires. His ambitions ran deeper toward a destiny he barely understood himself. A commotion in the village square drew him from his thoughts. Dropping his tools, he stepped outside to see riders in black armor thundering through the village. Their tabards bore the crimson emblem of Queen Kaja, a rose dripping blood. Here the proclamation of her eternal majesty called the lead rider, whose pale face and 2 sharp teeth marked him as one of the Queen's THRS. Humans who served vampires in hopes of one day receiving the dark gift themselves. The dragon Valax has awakened in the Black Peak Mountains. Its fire threatens the realm. The Queen offers her favor to any who can slay the beast. The villagers murmured fearfully. Dragons were rare but deadly creatures of ancient magic whose blood and breath could burn through stone. Few who faced them returned. As the riders departed, Benio returned to his forge with newfound purpose. By dawn, the strange sword was complete. A weapon of perfect balance, its edge gleaming with unnatural sharpness. He named it Promia Promise. 3 days later, he stood at the edge of Thornwall, a pack slung over his shoulder. Promia sheathed at his hip. Old Magda waited on the road, a bundle of herbs and charms in her withered hands. "Wear this at your throat," she said, pressing a small pouch containing wolf's bane and vervain into his palm. "It will mask your scent from the dampers and vacalatzi that hunt in the shadow of her castle." "Thank you, Magda." The old woman's cloudy eyes suddenly cleared, focusing on him with uncanny intensity. "You go not to slay the dragon, but to claim the queen." It wasn't a question. Benio nodded once. "I made a promise." "Then heed my final warning," Magda whispered. "The Strigoi queen has walked this earth for 7 centuries. She has outlived empires. Her heart, if it still beats at all, is colder than winter ice. To love her is to lose your soul." Perhaps, Benio replied, or perhaps she has forgotten what it means to be loved. With those words, he turned toward the mountain path that would lead him to the dragon's lair, and beyond it to the dark spires of Kaj's domain. The journey was harsh. Benio traveled through forests where shadows moved independently of their casters, and past villages where doors were marked with ancient symbols of protection. Twice, he encountered the queen's hunting parties. Pale nobles astride midnight steeds, their eyes gleaming hungrily in the darkness. Each time he hid, the pouch at his throat keeping him from their notice. On the 7th night, he reached the foothills of the Black Peak Mountains. The air smelled of sulfur and ash, and the ground beneath his feet was warm to the touch. As he made camp in the shelter of a stone outcropping, a voice spoke from the darkness. Another hero seeking glory. The figure that emerged was tall and gaunt, dressed in tattered finery that had once been magnificent. His eyes reflected the firelight like those of a cat, and when he smiled, his teeth were stained dark, or perhaps a fool seeking death. Benio's hand moved to Promsa's hilt. "Who asks?" "Lazarus," the stranger replied with a mocking bow. "Once court magician to her majesty. Now let us say I serve in a different capacity." He circled the fire, moving with inhuman grace. "The dragon has already consumed 7 nights. What makes you think you'll fare better, blacksmith?" Benio stiffened. "How do you know what I am?" Lazarus laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping stone. "The soot embedded in your fingernails. The way you assess my blade with a craftsman's eye." The encounter with Kaja had drained him more thoroughly than the battle with the dragon. His blood hummed with strange energies, the twin magics of dragonkind and vampire wearing within his veins. His chambers were surprisingly luxurious, a spacious circular room with tapestried walls, a massive 4-oster bed draped in crimson velvet, and tall windows covered with heavy curtains to block the coming daylight. A fire burned in a hearth of black marble, casting dancing shadows across the stone floor. "The queen rarely grants outsiders such accommodations," remarked his escort, a pale-faced THRL, whose vacant eyes suggested years of blood servitude. "You have made an impression." There was neither jealousy nor admiration in his voice, only the flat observation of one whose emotions had long since been drained away. Left alone, Benio approached the window, drawing back the heavy drapes. The eastern sky had begun to pale, the stars fading as dawn approached. Below the castle ground stretched out in eerie stillness, gardens of night blooming flowers, fountains flowing with water so dark it might have been blood, and beyond the village that supported the vampire court. He could see movement there, humans preparing for their day, while their immortal masters retreated to their coffins and crypts. An ecosystem of predator and prey existing in uneasy balance. Yet he sensed that beyond the relative safety of the castle's shadow, the outer villages lived in constant terror, never knowing when the queen's hunters might descend upon them. Exhaustion finally overcame him. He removed Promsa from its sheath, placing the sword beside the bed within easy reach, and collapsed onto the mattress. As sleep claimed him, his last thought was of Kasha's face when she had tasted his blood, the moment when her careful mask had slipped, revealing something vulnerable beneath. Dreams came swiftly, but they were not his own. The dragon's blood had changed his sleeping mind, just as it had altered his waking body. He found himself drifting through memories that belonged to Valiax, soaring above primeval forests, breathing fire that could melt stone, hoarding treasures in mountain layers. Ancient hatreds and ancient hungers filled his dreaming consciousness. Then the dream shifted, darkened. He was running through moonlit forests, heart pounding with fear and exhilaration. Blood on his lips, warm and coppery. Centuries compressed into moments, castle walls rising around him, a crown of thorns and silver placed upon his brow, an eternity of night stretching before him. Cash's memories gleamed from their blood exchange, tangled with his own. He woke with a gasp as the sun reached its zenith, though no light penetrated the heavy curtains. For a moment he was disoriented, uncertain where the dragon ended, where the vampire began, and what remained of the blacksmith's son from Thornwall. His shadow stretched across the floor, too long, too dark, moving independently of his own body. The dragon's curse growing stronger. A knock at the door interrupted his troubled thoughts. "Enter," he called, reaching for Promessa. The door opened to reveal a young woman, fully human, judging by the healthy flush of her skin. She carried a tray of food and a pitcher of water. "The queen instructed that you be fed," she said, setting down her burden on a small table. Unlike the THR who had escorted him, her eyes were clear and alert. "I'm Alara. I serve in the daylight hours. You're not afraid?" Benio asked, noting how she glanced curiously at his golden-flecked eyes, the shadow that coiled at his feet. She smiled faintly. "I was born in this castle's shadow. Fear is as natural as breathing here." She poured water into a silver goblet. "But you're something new. The dragon slayer who made the queen retreat to her chambers before dawn. Is that unusual? She rarely rests, even in daylight." Ara's voice dropped to a whisper. "Some say she hasn't truly slept in centuries, that her mind never finds peace." Benio thought of the fragments of memory he had glimpsed during their blood exchange, the weight of immortality, the endless vigilance required to maintain her power. "That seems a terrible fate." "All fates are terrible in the queen's domain," Ara replied matter-of-factly. "But yours need not be. There are ways out of the castle that even her guards don't know. Passages built when this fortress was still human rule." She met his gaze directly. "You could be gone before sunset. You would help me escape." She shrugged. "I help those who need it, but you." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't think you want escape." Before Benio could respond, a new voice spoke from the shadows of the room. How perceptive little daylight servant. Lazarus stepped into view, seemingly having materialized from the darkest corner of the chamber. Ara stiffened, dropping immediately into a deep curtsy. "Leave us," the vampire commanded. The girl retreated without another word, though she cast one final meaningful glance at Benio before closing the door behind her. "Making friends already," Lazarus drawled, examining the room with casual interest. "Dangerous in a place where friendship is merely another form of currency." Benio rose from the bed, noting that despite the full daylight outside, the vampire moved with ease. "I thought your kind couldn't abide the sun." "The oldest of us learn tricks," Lazarus replied with a thin smile. "Ways to endure what should destroy us. The queen, of course, has mastered this art completely. She walks in sunlight when she must, though it pains her greatly." He picked up an apple from the tray, studying it without interest before setting it down again. "But I didn't come to discuss vampire weaknesses." "Why did you come then?" "To warn you." Lazarus's expression grew serious. "The court is in turmoil. News of your exchange with the queen has spread. Already factions are forming. Some see you as an opportunity, others as a threat." "Factions?" Benio frowned. "I thought Kaj's rule was absolute." Lazarus laughed softly. "No power is absolute, dragon slayer. Even immortals can be destroyed. The queen has enemies both within her court and beyond its walls." He moved to the window, peering through a small gap in the curtains. "For centuries, she has ruled through a careful balance of fear, reward, and tradition. Your presence disturbs that balance. Because of my claim to her, because she did not immediately reject it." Lazarus turned back to face him. "Had she killed you or imprisoned you or even turned you into one of her mindless thralls, the court would have understood power asserting itself over presumption. But she fed from you an intimate act and then granted you honored guest quarters rather than a dungeon cell." He shook his head, genuine puzzlement in his ancient eyes. "In 7 centuries, I have never seen her respond thus to any suitor, mortal or immortal. You have become a disruption." Benio absorbed this information silently. The blood exchange had shown him fragments of Kaj's isolation, the walls she had built around herself over centuries. That she had allowed even that brief vulnerability was significant. "There is more." Lazarus continued. "The Crimson Council meets tonight. The 7 eldest vampires in the Queen's court, her advisors, and occasionally her restraints. They can overrule her, not directly, but their combined power approaches her own if all 7 stood against her." He left the implication hanging. They will demand to assess you to understand what you are and what threat you might pose. I pose no threat to Kaja. Lazarus's expression turned pitying. Everyone poses a threat to someone of her position. Power invites challenge. Immortality invites envy. Beauty invites possession. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. And love, or its illusion, invites betrayal. I would never betray her, perhaps not willingly. Lazarus gestured to Benio's shadow, which had stretched toward him aggressively. But the dragon's curse grows stronger with each passing day. Soon it will demand payment for the power it has granted you. Benio had felt it, the creeping darkness, the foreign hungers. I can control it for now, Lazarus agreed. But what of a year from now, a decade? The queen thinks in centuries, dragon slayer. Even if she harbored some sentiment toward you, she would not risk her reign on a mortal whose lifespan is but a eye-link to her. The dragon's blood extends life, Benio argued. I could have centuries yet. Extended life is not immortality, Lazarus countered. And the price of those extended years would be your humanity, the very thing that seems to intrigue her. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. Consider carefully what you truly seek here, the queen's bed, her crown, or something else entirely. With that cryptic remark, he departed, leaving Benio alone with his thoughts and his restless shadow. The day passed slowly. Benio ate little, finding that food no longer satisfied his hunger. Instead, he paced the chamber, examining the tapestries that depicted ancient battles between vampires and other supernatural creatures, werewolves with slavering jaws, fob beings with cruel beauty, and dragons whose scales glittered with malevolence. One image in particular caught his attention. A red-haired woman standing amid a field of fallen warriors, a crown of thorns and silver upon her head. Kasia, in her early days, the embroidered scene captured both her beauty and the terrible power she wielded. Her expression one of triumph tinged with isolation. As sunset approached, Benio felt a strange resonance within him, an awareness of the sun's descent, as though his body had become attuned to the rhythms of night and day in new ways. The dragon's blood made him stronger in daylight. The vampire's essence that he had absorbed during their exchange pulled him toward the coming darkness. Another knock came at his door just as the last rays of sun vanished beyond the western mountains. This time it was Lilith, the vampire captain he had met at the gates. "The queen commands your presence," she said without preamble. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Benio sensed the tension coiled within her. "The Crimson Council awaits." Benio retrieved Promsa, buckling the sword at his hip despite Lilith's disapproving glance. "I go nowhere without it," he told her, meeting her gaze steadily. "Very well," she replied coldly, "but know that drawing it in the council's presence will be considered an act of war." She led him down the winding tower staircase and through a labyrinth of corridors, deeper into the castle's heart than he had ventured before. The passages grew older, the architecture shifting from Gothic to something more ancient and primal. Torches burned with an unnatural blue flame, casting more shadows than light. Finally, they reached a massive door of blackened wood banded with silver. Arcane symbols had been carved into its surface, glowing faintly with an inner light. Two vampire guards stood at attention, their armor more elaborate than those Benio had seen before, ceremonial guardians of whatever lay beyond. "The dragon slayer as commanded," Lilith announced. The guards stepped aside, and the great door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. "Remember," Lilith murmured as Benio passed her, "they are older than nations, cunning as serpents. Speak only when spoken to, and guard your thoughts. Some have powers that can pluck the truth from your mind like ripe fruit." With those comforting words, she ushered him into the chamber beyond, a perfect circle of obsidian, illuminated by 7 tall candles of black wax. In the center stood a single chair, plain and unadorned. Around it, arranged in a larger circle, were 7 ornate thrones, each occupied by a figure more terrifying than the last. And upon an 8th throne, elevated slightly above the others, sat Kasia herself. In this setting, surrounded by the oldest of her kind, she appeared both regal and dangerous, a predator among predators. Her crimson gown seemed to absorb the candle light, and upon her brow sat a delicate crown of silver thorns. Her eyes met Benio's across the chamber, her expression giving nothing away. Yet in that brief glance, he felt again the connection that had formed during their blood exchange, a tenuous bridge across centuries of isolation. "Benio of Thornwall," she announced, her voice carrying effortlessly in the perfect acoustics of the chamber. "You stand before the Crimson Council, the eldest and wisest of my court. They wish to understand what you are and what you seek in my domain." She gestured to the solitary chair. "Be seated," and answered truthfully. "Deception will be poorly received." As Benio moved toward the chair, he felt the weight of 14 ancient inhuman eyes following his every step. The Crimson Council had awoken, and the trial of the Dragon Slayer had begun. The obsidian chamber pulsed with ancient power as Benio sat in the solitary chair. The 7 members of the Crimson Council studied him with predatory intensity, their ageless faces revealing nothing of their thoughts. "I am Vladimir, first of the council," intoned a vampire whose pallid features seemed carved from marble, his accent bearing traces of lands long forgotten by mortal histories. "We would know what manner of creature sits before us, neither fully human nor truly immortal." Benio met the ancient vampire's gaze steadily. "I am Benio of Thornwall, a blacksmith who slew the dragon Valiax and bears the consequences of its blood." "The consequences?" "Yes," whispered a female counselor whose skin was so translucent that Benio could see the network of veins beneath, long dry of human blood. "The dragon's essence changes you even now. I can see the shadow growing within." She leaned forward, her movements fluid as water. "I am Seraphina, seer of the night. Your future divides like forked lightning, one path leading to glory, the other to abomination. Both paths are dangerous to our kind," rumbled a massive vampire with Moorish features, golden rings adorning his fingers. "The dragon cursed have walked among us before. They burn bright but brief, leaving destruction in their wake." "Ibrahim speaks truth," added a 4th counselor, her Asian features delicate, yet her eyes hard as onyx. "The last who bore such a curse nearly destroyed the Eastern courts 3 centuries ago. We cannot risk such chaos again." Throughout these exchanges, Queen Kazur remained silent, her expression unreadable. But Benio, attuned to her now through their blood exchange, sensed the tension beneath her calm exterior. "You claim to love our queen," said a vampire with flame-red hair similar to Kazur's own, perhaps a distant relative from her mortal days. "Yet love is fleeting, while our kind endures. What guarantee have we that your devotion will not turn to resentment as you watch yourself age, while she remains eternally youthful?" Before Benio could answer, the 6th counselor spoke, and he sniffed the air. "The scent of iron that clings to you despite the herbs you wear." With sudden speed, Lazarus was beside him, nostrils flaring, curious. "You smell of mortal blood, yet something else pulses beneath your skin, something familiar." His eyes narrowed. "You seek not just the dragon, but the queen herself." Benio drew Promsa in one fluid motion, its blade catching the firelight with an eerie glow. "My business is my own." Lazarus hissed at the sight of the blade, recoiling slightly. Silver and steel, blessed and cursed in equal measure. A vampire hunter's weapon. His expression shifted from fear to amusement. "Yet your heart beats not with hatred, but with, oh, how delicious, love." Before Benio could respond, Lazarus backed away, fading into the shadows. "I shall watch your fate with interest, blacksmith. Few stories amuse my queen these days. Perhaps yours will provide her some momentary diversion before the dragon takes you." His disembodied voice lingered in the darkness. "The beast's lair lies within the volcanic crater at the mountain's peak. Reach it by dawn if you wish to find him torpid. And should you somehow survive, tell Her Majesty that Lazarus sends his eternal devotion." As silence returned to the night, Benitio stared into the flames, wondering if he had just met an ally or an enemy. Either way, his path was clear. Tomorrow, he would face the dragon, the first trial in his quest to fulfill a promise made by a child to a queen who had likely forgotten his existence. But Benio had not forgotten. The memory of ruby eyes and midnight laughter had sustained him through 15 years of preparation. Tomorrow would prove whether that preparation had been enough. Dawn broke over the Black Peak Mountains, painting the volcanic slopes in hues of blood and gold. Benio had begun his ascent hours before first light, following a treacherous path that wound through razor-sharp rocks and fields of black glass. The air grew thinner and hotter as he climbed, sulfurous fumes stinging his lungs with each labored breath. The mountain itself seemed alive, trembling occasionally beneath his feet. Not with earthquakes, Benio realized, but with the deep rumbling breaths of the creature that slumbered within its heart. By mid-morning, he stood at the edge of the crater. Below, a vast cavern opened into the mountain's core, where molten lava bubbled in pools of liquid fire. Spanning one such pool like a living bridge lay Valax, the dragon whose awakening had terrorized the realm. The beast was magnificent in its terrible splendor. Nearly 60 ft from snout to tail tip, its scales glimmered like burnished copper, darkening to obsidian along its spine. Great leathery wings lay folded against its flanks, occasionally twitching as it dreamed draconic dreams. Steam rose from its nostrils with each exhalation, and the heat of its body had turned the surrounding stone cherry red. Benio crouched behind a boulder, studying the sleeping titan. Dragons were creatures of ancient magic, born when the world was young. Their blood was said to grant extraordinary powers to those brave or foolish enough to bathe in it. Their hearts, if consumed, could extend a mortal's life by centuries. Their scales could turn aside the strongest blades, but they were not immortal. They could be killed if one knew how. Old Magda's voice echoed in his memory. A dragon's hide is impenetrable except at 4 points. The eyes, the throat, the joint where wing meets shoulder, and the soft underbelly where the scales are thinnest. Benio unsheathed Promsa, its enchanted blade seeming to drink in the crimson light that permeated the cavern. The sword hummed faintly, resonating with the ancient magic that surrounded it. This close to the dragon, he could feel the power emanating from the creature, a primordial energy that made his skin prickle and his blood sing. Moving silently despite his bulk, Benio descended into the cavern, using natural ledges as stepping stones to approach the slumbering beast. Heat blasted his face, sweat pouring from his brow, but he pressed on. 20 ft from the dragon, he paused, gauging the distance to the creature's throat. One perfect strike. That was all he would have. He tensed, ready to spring forward when the dragon's eye snapped open. An eye of molten gold with a vertical pupil that contracted sharply as it focused on the intruder. Mortal rumbled Valiax, its voice like stones grinding against each other. You tread where even the undead fear to venture. The dragon's massive head rose, smoke curling from between teeth the size of daggers. It studied Benio with ancient cunning. You are not like the others, she sent, it observed. Not a knight puffed up with vain glory, not a thr desperate for favor. The dragon inhaled deeply, its chest expanding. You smell of iron and ambition. And something else, something familiar. Benio stood his ground. Promessa held ready. I've come to end your threat to these lands. Valiax laughed, a sound like an avalanche that shook loose stones from the cavern's ceiling. These lands, child. These mountains were mine when her kind still cowered from the sun. The Queen of Night is merely the latest to claim dominion over what has always been mine. The dragon uncoiled its massive body, rising to its full height. Magma dripped from its scales, sizzling where it struck stone. But you have not come solely for me, Valak continued, circling Benio with predatory grace. Your heart beats for her, the blood-drinker who has sent so many to their deaths in this pit. My reasons are my own, Benio replied, tracking the dragon's movements, waiting for the moment to strike. So they are. The dragon's eyes narrowed. Perhaps we might reach an understanding, mortal. I have no quarrel with your kind. It is the Stregoi who encroach upon my territory, building their castles of bone and shadow on my mountainside. What are you proposing? Return to your queen. Tell her I have withdrawn deeper into the earth, that I will trouble her lands no more. In exchange, she will remove her hunting parties from my mountains. Valex's voice dropped to a seductive rumble. You need not die here today. Benio hesitated. If the dragon spoke truly, he could return to Kaja's castle as the diplomat who had secured peace, not the warrior who had slain her enemy. Yet something in the dragon's too casual posture warned him. And if I refuse, Valak's jaws split in a terrible grin. Then we shall see if that pretty sword is more than ornament. With frightening speed, the dragon lunged. Benio dove aside as jaws snapped shut where he had stood moments before. He rolled across scorching stone, coming up beneath the creature's extended neck. With all his strength, he thrust Promia upward. The enchanted blade pierced scales that should have turned steel to splinters. Black blood hot as the surrounding magma gushed forth, splattering Benio's arms and chest. He twisted the sword, driving it deeper. Valiax roared, a sound of pain and fury that shook the entire mountain. Its head reared back, tearing the sword from Benio's grasp as it remained embedded in the dragon's throat. With a desperate leap, Benio caught hold of the hilt, his weight dragging the blade through flesh and sinew. The dragon thrashed, wings beating furiously, sending hurricane winds through the cavern. Benio clung to the sword, his hands burning as the creature's blood seared his flesh. With one final desperate heave, he twisted Promsa and sliced outward. The blade cut clean through the dragon's throat. More black blood fountained forth, coating Benio from head to toe. Valiax collapsed, its massive body crashing into the lava pool, sending waves of molten rock splashing against the cavern walls. As life faded from the dragon's golden eyes, it fixed Benio with a final knowing stare. Foolish mortal, it gurgled through the ruin of its throat. You might have been wise. Now you shall be cursed. The dragon's blood burned like liquid fire where it touched Benio's skin, seeping into his pores, flowing into the cuts and burns he had sustained in the battle. He tried to wipe it away, but it seemed to be absorbing into his very flesh. A strange sensation spread through his body. Not pain, but a cold fire that raced along his veins, reaching for his heart. He staggered back from the dragon's corpse, feeling the change taking hold. His vision sharpened, colors becoming more vivid, sense more intense. His muscles quivered with new strength. The burns on his skin were already healing, leaving behind patches of toughened flesh that gleamed faintly in the cavern's crimson light. "What's happening to me?" he gasped, staring at his hands as the last of the dragon's blood disappeared beneath his skin. "The blessing and curse of dragonkind," came a voice from the shadows. Lazarus stepped into view, his eyes reflecting the molten glow of the lava pools. Their blood grants power beyond mortal kin, but it extracts a price. The vampire circled Benio, studying him with fascination, strength, speed, longevity, perhaps even a measure of magic, but also he gestured to where a small shadow had detached itself from Benio's feet, writhing with a life of its own, a darkness that will grow within you, a hunger not unlike our own. Benio watched in horror as his shadow twisted into shapes that mimicked his form but were somehow wrong, too angular, too bestial. "What have I become?" he whispered. Lazarus smiled, revealing fangs that gleamed in the firelight. Something new, something between neither fully mortal nor truly monstrous. He extended a pale hand. "Come, the queen will be most interested in her champion's evolution." Benio retrieved Promsa from the dragon's corpse, wiping the black blood on a cloth that smoldered at its touch. The sword seemed changed as well, its blade now etched with patterns that resembled scales, its edge gleaming with an inner fire. As he sheathed the weapon, he felt a strange resonance between it and his transformed body, as though the sword had become an extension of himself, bound by the dragon's blood they had both absorbed. "Lead on," he told Lazarus, his voice deeper and more resonant than before. It's time the queen remembered her promise. Together they ascended from the dragon's lair, leaving behind the corpse of an ancient power and the last remnants of Benio's humanity. Ahead lay the castle of Queen Kaja, its spires visible through the volcanic haze, dark fingers reaching toward a sky that had begun to darken with unnatural speed. Night was falling. The time of the vampire approached, and Benio, no longer purely human, walked willingly toward the embrace of the immortal queen who had once laughed at a child's innocent vow. The journey from Dragon's Peak to Queen Kaja's castle took 3 days. Though for Benio, time had become a strange, fluid thing. He no longer required rest as he once did. A few hours of stillness each night was sufficient to restore his strength. Food held little appeal, though occasionally a strange hunger would gnaw at him, one that made his shadow writhe and stretch toward living things that crossed their path. The dragon's essence, Lazarus explained as they walked a narrow mountain path, the castle growing ever closer on the horizon. It seeks to consume, to dominate. You must master it or it will master you. Benio said nothing, but he felt the truth of it. Within him, something ancient and terrible had awakened. A shadow self that whispered of power beyond imagination, if only he would surrender to its embrace. Each day, the struggle to maintain control grew more difficult. The castle itself seemed to rise directly from the mountainside, its black stone towers merging seamlessly with the jagged peaks. No mortar joined the massive blocks. Legend said they had been fused by dragonfire centuries ago when Kaja had first claimed this realm. Gargoyles perched on every buttress and corner, their stone eyes following visitors with malevolent awareness. Some, Benio realized with a chill, were not statues at all but living creatures bound in service to the vampire queen. As they approached the massive iron gates, Lazarus placed a restraining hand on Benitio's arm. A word of caution, blacksmith, he murmured. The court of Queen Kasia is a nest of vipers. Some have served her for centuries. Others plot constantly for her favor or her throne. Trust no one. Not even you, Benio asked with a wry smile. The vampire's lips twitched. Especially not me. I serve my own interest first always. His expression grew serious. But I admit to curiosity about your fate. Few mortals have ever walked willingly into the queen's domain with purpose other than submission. Before Benio could respond, the gates swung open with a groan of ancient hinges. 6 guards emerged. Not the human THRS Benio had expected, but true nose Radu, their pale faces beautiful and terrible in the fading light. They wore armor of black and silver, and their eyes gleamed with the eerie luminescence of the undead. Lazarus, hissed the captain, a female vampire whose hair was bound in intricate braids studded with bone fragments. You return unexpectedly, and with company her nostrils flared as she caught Benio's scent. What manner of creature is this? Not human, not vampire, not. Her eyes widened. Dragon touched. Impossible. Nothing is impossible, Lilith, Lazarus replied smoothly. As this man has proven by slaying Valiak single-handedly. A murmur ran through the guards. Lilith studied Benio with newfound weariness. The queen must be informed immediately. Indeed, said Lazarus. I believe she will find this development most intriguing. They were escorted through the outer bailey where more of the queen's servants moved about their tasks. Some human, their necks bearing the twin puncture, marks of vampire feeding. Others clearly supernatural with elongated limbs or 2 sharp features that mark them as creatures of the night. The inner keep rose like a mountain of shadow, its windows glowing with eerie blue-white light. As they crossed the threshold, Benio felt a pressure against his mind. A subtle probing as though the very stone sought to know his intentions. The castle's protections, Lazarus whispered, ancient blood magic woven into its foundations. It recognizes threats to the queen. They passed through vast halls hung with tapestries depicting battles long forgotten by mortal histories. Chandeliers crafted from human bones cast ghostly light across floors inlaid with obsidian and silver. Mirrors lined some corridors, but they showed only empty passageways. No reflection of the vampires who walked these halls. Benio, however, cast a reflection, though not one he recognized. The face that looked back at him from the polished silver was harder, more angular than he remembered. His eyes, once clear blue, now held flecks of gold that caught the light like a predator's, and behind him his shadow moved independently, stretching and contracting with each step. Finally, they reached a set of towering doors carved with scenes of the hunt. Vampires pursuing mortals through moonlit forests. Their faces masks of beautiful cruelty. 2 thralls in crimson livery stood guard, their eyes vacant, their postures rigid. The queen holds court, one in Ed, his voice flat and empty. She receives no visitors. Lazarus smiled thinly. Tell her the dragon's lair has come to claim his reward. The THR's expression didn't change, but he turned and disappeared through a small side door. Minutes later, he returned. Her Majesty will see you, the mortal only. Lazarus arched an eyebrow at Bonio. It seems you've piqued her interest after all. He bowed with exaggerated courtesy. Remember what I said about vipers, blacksmith, and remember this. The queen has not survived 7 centuries by being predictable. The massive doors swung open, revealing the throne room beyond. Benio stepped forward alone, Promessa, a reassuring weight at his side, the dragon's blood singing in his veins. The hall stretched nearly 100 ft, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Columns of black marble supported arches of delicate stonework between which hung banners bearing the queen's crimson rose. At the far end, upon a dais of graduated steps, stood a throne carved from a single massive piece of bloodstone, its surface polished to a mirror sheen. And upon it sat Kaja. She was exactly as Benizio remembered, yet utterly different. Her beauty was still a physical shock. Alabaster skin framed by hair like liquid flame, eyes the color of fresh blood, lips curved in a perpetual half-smile that promised both pleasure and pain. She wore a gown of midnight velvet that left her shoulders bare, revealing skin so pale it seemed to glow in the chamber's dim light. But where the boy had seen only beauty, the man saw the predator beneath, the ancient calculating intelligence in those crimson eyes, the subtle tension in her posture that spoke of a creature always ready to strike. Around her throat hung a necklace of black diamonds, each stone rumored to contain the soul of a lover who had failed to please her. The court filled the chamber's shadows, dozens of vampires in finery from 100 different eras, their ageless faces watching the newcomer with hunger and suspicion. Some were ancient, their skin like parchment stretched over bone. The anger in her expression gave way to something more calculated. She moved to a sideboard where crystal decanter stood filled with dark liquid that Benio knew instinctively wasn't wine. She poured a measure into a goblet, the viscous crimson catching the light. A puzzle, she repeated, sipping from the goblet. An apt description. You should not exist, Benio of Thornwall. A mortal who slays a dragon and survives its blood curse. A blacksmith who crafts a blade capable of killing ancient creatures. Her eyes narrowed. Who helped you forge that sword? It bears enchantments beyond mortal crafting. Old Magda of Thornwall. She knows the old ways. Recognition flashed across Cash's face. Magdalena the Wise. I thought her long dead. A bitter smile played at her lips. Once she sought to end my reign with fire and silver. Now she sends you with sword and dragon blood. Her hatred of my kind endures, it seems. She warned me against coming here, Benio admitted. Said to love you would cost me my soul. She was not wrong. Kaja set down her goblet. Love is an illusion mortals create to give meaning to their brief lives. It has no place in my existence. Benio took a step toward her. Yet you kept my rose. All these years. Something vulnerable flickered briefly in her eyes before vanishing behind cold contempt. A trinket nothing more as you shall be if you persist in this foolishness. She turned away, pacing toward a tall window that overlooked the mountains. The night grows old. I have indulged your fantasy long enough. Then why not simply kill me? Benio pressed, following her. Why dismiss your court? Why speak to me at all? She didn't turn. Perhaps I find you amusing. A momentary distraction from eternity. Or perhaps, he said softly, closing the distance between them, something in you remembers what it was to be human, to want more than power and blood. Her shoulders tensed. Humanity is a weakness I discarded centuries ago. Then why do you rule humans? Why surround yourself with their art, their music, their blood? He was close enough now to see the intricate embroidery on her gown, the individual strands of fire-red hair that cascaded down her back. You could exist in isolation, feeding only when necessary. Instead, you've built a court, a kingdom, mirrors of human civilization. She turned then, her face inches from his, eyes blazing. You understand nothing of what I am. Then show me, he challenged. If I am to be merely a trinket, a momentary amusement before you discard me, at least grant me understanding of what you truly are. For a long moment she studied him, her expression unreadable. Then something shifted in her crimson eyes. A decision made. Very well, blacksmith, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You wish to know me, to understand the creature you so foolishly claim to love. I shall grant your wish. She lifted one pale hand to his face, her touch cool against his skin. Her nails lengthened subtly, sharp as razors, one tracing a thin line along his jaw. Blood welled from the shallow cut, black tinged from the dragon's curse. Your blood carries power now, she murmured, her eyes fixed on the dark liquid. Dragon's essence, ancient magic, her pupils dilated, hunger evident in her gaze. If I drink from you, I will know your mind, your memories, your soul, and you will know something of mine. Benio understood the danger implicit in her words. Vampire feeding was intimate, invasive, a melding of consciousness as well as blood. She would see every thought, every weakness, every fear he possessed. And if I refuse, her lips curved in a cold smile, then leave my castle by dawn. Return to your mortal life while you still can. Forget your childish promises and naive dreams. Benio didn't hesitate. He tilted his head, exposing the column of his throat. Take what you need. Surprise registered briefly in her eyes, followed by something darker. She leaned forward, her breath cool against his skin. Remember, blacksmith, you chose this. Her fangs pierced his flesh in a burst of exquisite agony that quickly transformed into something else entirely. A rush of sensation that sent lightning coursing through his veins. The world dissolved around him as her consciousness invaded his memories, flashing behind his eyes like fragments of a broken mirror. A boy waiting by the roadside, an iron rose in his small hand. Years of training, hammering metal until his hands bled, determined to master his craft. The dragon's cavern, fire and blood, the curse seeping into his very bones. The journey to her castle, driven by a promise made in childhood innocence. But then the flow reversed, and suddenly Benicia was experiencing memories not his own. Fragments of a life spanning centuries. A young woman in medieval garb fleeing through a forest as flames consumed her village behind her. The same woman, pale and beautiful, standing over the body of her first kill. Horror and exhilaration wearing in her expression. Decades passing like leaves in the wind. Loneliness stretching into centuries as she watched mortal lives flicker and fade around her. The weight of her crown heavier with each passing year, as she struggled to maintain her realm against enemies both mortal and immortal, and buried deep beneath it all, a profound emptiness that nothing, not power, not blood, not worship, had ever filled. With a gasp, Kasia tore herself away. Blood, his blood, staining her perfect lips. She staggered back, genuine shock breaking through her careful composure. Impossible, she whispered, touching her mouth with trembling fingers. Your blood, the dragon's curse. It showed me the truth, Benio finished, pressing his hand to the wound on his neck. The pain was already fading. The dragon's magic healing his flesh. That I meant every word. That my promise wasn't a child's fantasy, but a vow I've spent 15 years preparing to fulfill. Kasia turned away, visibly struggling to regain her composure. When she spoke again, her voice had hardened once more. Dawn approaches. You will be given quarters in the Eastern Tower. Rest. Recover. She glanced over her shoulder, her expression carefully neutral. We shall speak again when night returns. Perhaps then we will determine your place in my court. It wasn't acceptance, but neither was it rejection. For now it was enough. As guards appeared to escort him from the throne room, Benitio caught one last glimpse of the vampire queen. Standing alone by the window, the iron rose still clutched in her pale hand, her expression haunted by memories not entirely her own. The eastern tower rose like a black needle against the lightning sky. As Benio was led up its winding staircase, he felt the fatigue of the past days washing over him. Others appeared newly turned, their beauty still carrying echoes of humanity. All were deadly. So Queen Kasia's voice carried effortlessly across the vast space. The dragon's slayer comes before us. Her gaze traveled over Benio, lingering on the sword at his hip, the faint golden glow of his eyes, the shadow that moved unnaturally at his feet. You have changed since last we met, mortal. Benio knelt on one knee, head bowed in the formal gesture of respect. Your Majesty remembers me. Then a ripple of surprise passed through the court. The queen's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in the depths of her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or merely curiosity. We have lived many centuries, she replied. Faces blur like reflections in troubled water. She leaned forward slightly, studying him more intently. Yet there is something familiar about you. Rise and state your name and purpose. Benio stood, meeting her gaze directly, a boldness that caused several courtiers to hiss in disapproval. I am Benitio of Thornwall, son of Henrik the blacksmith. I have slain the dragon Valiax as proclaimed by your royal decree. And what reward do you seek for this service? The queen asked, her voice deceptively soft. Gold lands, a title among mortals, or perhaps, her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You wish for the dark gift itself. I seek none of these things, your majesty. Murmurs spread through the court. Queen Kasia's eyebrows rose fractionally, the closest to surprise her features would display. What then, dragon slayer? What brings a mortal willingly into my domain? Bearing a sword that reeks of silver and holy water, his body transformed by dragon magic. Benio took a step forward, ignoring the gods who tensed at his movement. 15 years ago, I stood by the roadside in Thornwall and gave you an iron rose. I made you a promise that night, a child's promise that you laughed at. His voice carried clearly through the hushed chamber. I told you that when I grew up I would be your husband. I have come to fulfill that vow. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, like a gathering storm, whispers erupted throughout the court. Some vampires laughed outright. Others watched with predatory intensity, sensing weakness or opportunity. On her throne, Kaja remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped to a dangerous purr. "You presume much, Benio of Thornwall." She rose from her throne in one fluid motion, descending the steps with inhuman grace. The court parted before her as she approached him. Many have sought to claim me over the centuries. Kings, emperors, creatures of power beyond mortal comprehension. She circled him slowly like a wolf sizing up its prey. All have failed. She stopped directly before him, close enough that he could smell the ancient roses and copper that surrounded her like an aura. "Why should I not drain you dry where you stand for such impertinence?" Benio held her gaze, even as his shadow whiffed anxiously at his feet. "Because you kept my rose, your majesty. Because something in you remembered the boy who wasn't afraid." For the briefest moment, something flickered across Kaja's perfect features, an emotion too swift to name. Then her expression hardened once more. "Court is dismissed," she announced suddenly, not looking away from Benio. "All of you, leave us." The vampires hesitated, clearly reluctant to miss whatever was about to unfold. Kaja turned her head slightly, her eyes flashing dangerously. Now, within moments, the vast chamber had emptied, leaving Benito alone with the vampire queen. In the sudden silence, he could hear the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat and was acutely aware that it was the only heart beating in the entire castle. Kaja circled Benio like a predator, her gown whispering against the stone floor. The emptiness of the throne room amplified every sound. Her measured footsteps, his steady breathing, the faint hum of promia in its sheath, responding to the ancient magic that permeated the air. "The rose," she said finally, coming to stand before him once more, a crude thing of iron, twisted by a child's inexpert hands. From within the folds of her gown, she produced a small object that gleamed dully in the torch light. Benio's breath caught. The iron rose unchanged after 15 years, preserved by whatever magic vampires possess to hold back the ravages of time. "You kept it," he whispered. "Sentimentality is a weakness I cannot afford," Kaja replied, turning the rose between her pale fingers. "Yet here it remains, a curiosity, a reminder of mortal folly." Her crimson eyes met his. "You were a child. Children make promises without understanding their weight." "I understood," Benio countered. "Not fully, perhaps, but even then I knew my heart belonged to you." A cold smile curved her lips. "Hearts are fragile things, easily broken, easily stopped." She placed one slender hand against his chest, directly over the organ in question. "Yours beats strangely now. The dragon's blood has changed you. Not in ways that matter." Her fingers pressed harder, her inhuman strength evident even in this casual gesture. "Everything matters. Blacksmith, the dragon's curse runs deeper than you know. Even now, it reshapes you from within." Her nostrils flared slightly. "I can smell it. The magic binding itself to your soul, consuming what you were to create something new." She withdrew her hand abruptly. "You are no longer fully human, yet not truly immortal, a half-creature caught between worlds." Something like genuine curiosity flickered in her eyes. "How does it feel?" Benio considered the question carefully, like standing at the edge of an abyss, knowing I could either fall or learn to fly. "Poetic," she murmured, "but ultimately meaningless. The dragon's blood grants power, yes, but it also corrupts. In time, you will become a shadow of yourself, driven by hungers you cannot now imagine. Unless I find an anchor," Benio said quietly. "Something to hold on to as the darkness grows." Kaja laughed, the sound like silver bells in the cavernous room. "And you believe I could be that anchor? I who have walked in darkness for 7 centuries." She gestured to the empty throne room. "Look around you, dragon slayer. This is my domain, a realm of eternal night, populated by creatures who feed on the living. There is no light here to drive away your shadows." "Perhaps," Benio acknowledged, "or perhaps you have existed in darkness for so long that you've forgotten what light feels like." Her expression hardened. "You speak of things you cannot understand." "My existence is lonely," he interrupted, daring greatly. 7 centuries of power, of worship and fear from your subjects. But when did someone last look upon you without terror or ambition in their eyes? When did someone last touch you? Not as a queen, but as a woman." For a moment, rage transformed her features into something terrible. a glimpse of the monster beneath the beautiful facade. The temperature in the room plummeted, frost crystallizing on the stone floor around her feet. "You presumed too much," she hissed, her voice layered with supernatural harmonics that sent shivers down his spine. "I could tear your throat out before your next heartbeat. I could cast you into my dungeons where you would serve as sustenance for centuries. I could turn your mind inside out until you believed yourself a dog crawling at my feet." Benio stood his ground, though his shadow trembled visibly. "You could," he agreed, "but you won't. And why not? Because I'm the first puzzle you've encountered in centuries, a being so ancient that his features had begun to shift from human to something else entirely. His fingers elongated into talons, his eyes entirely black. "The dragon's blood extends life," he said, his voice like stones grinding together. "Perhaps centuries, but it also corrupts. The shadow will consume him eventually as it does all who bear the curse. The only question is whether he will threaten our queen before that happens. I would never harm her," Benio stated firmly. The seventh and final counselor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. She appeared youngest of all with the face of a girl no more than 16, though her eyes held millennia of cruelty. "You say that now, dragon slayer. But when the curse reaches its zenith, when the shadow self consumes your humanity, what then? Even now, your own darkness stretches toward our queen, hungry for her power." Benio glanced down, alarmed to see his shadow extending across the obsidian floor, reaching toward Kaja's throne like grasping fingers. With effort, he pulled it back, forcing the darkness to coil once more around his feet. "The boy has some control at least," Vladimir observed. "But for how long? That is what concerns us." Queen Kaja raised a hand, silencing further commentary from the council. For the first time since the audience began, she spoke. "These concerns are valid, but they presuppose that I cannot defend myself against one dragon-cursed mortal." Her voice carried a subtle edge of irritation. "I who have ruled these lands for 7 centuries. I who have destroyed armies of both mortal and supernatural foes." "With respect, Your Majesty," Serafina responded. "It is not merely your physical safety that concerns us. Your interest in this mortal suggests an emotional vulnerability we have not witnessed before. Such attachments cloud judgment, even for one as powerful as yourself." A chill spread through the chamber as Kaja's expression darkened. "You question my judgment, Cirrus. I observe patterns across the tapestry of time," Serafina replied carefully. "And I see danger in this new thread you weave." Tension crackled in the air between the queen and her counselors. Benio realized he was witnessing a power struggle centuries in the making. The eternal push and pull between a sovereign's authority and the limitations her advisors sought to impose. "Perhaps," Ibrahim suggested, breaking the dangerous silence, "there is a compromise to be reached. A test for the dragon slayer to prove both his control over the curse and his devotion to our queen." Kaja's eyes narrowed slightly. "What test do you propose?" "The rite of 7 nights," Ibrahim said, causing murmurs among the other counselors. "An ancient tradition not invoked for over 3 centuries. Vladimir nodded slowly. "A fitting challenge. 7 nights to prove himself worthy or to reveal his true nature." "And if I pass this test," Benio asked, "then the council will not oppose your presence in the queen's court," Vladimir answered. "Though what position you might hold there remains Her Majesty's decision alone." Kaja studied Benio for a long moment, her crimson eyes revealing nothing of her thoughts. "The rite of 7 nights requires blood sacrifice," she said finally. "The dragon cursed would need to survive 7 feedings, one from each counselor without succumbing to the darkness within him. Say, vampire blood is powerful," Serafina added, "and volatile when mixed with dragon's essence. Many would be driven to madness by such a combination." Benio understood then this was not merely a test, but potentially a death sentence. 7 ancient vampires, each feeding from him, each infusing him with their toxic immortality while drawing out his dragon-tainted blood. The strain on body and mind would be immense, yet he had not come this far to retreat. "I accept the challenge," he said firmly. A subtle smile curved Kaja's perfect lips, the first emotion she had displayed during the entire proceeding. "Then it is settled. The rite begins tomorrow at midnight and concludes on the 7th night with my feeding, should the supplicant survive that long." The council session concluded shortly thereafter, each ancient vampire departing with varying expressions of satisfaction or concern. Only Kasha remained, descending from her elevated throne to stand before Benio. "You accept challenges readily, blacksmith," she observed when they were alone. "First a dragon, now my counsel. One might question your sense of self-preservation or my determination." He countered something softened in her gaze. "The rite is no mere formality. Each night will bring you closer to the edge of madness. The dragon's curse will fight against the vampire essence, tearing you apart from within. Yet you did not oppose it, because you must be tested," she replied simply. "Not for them, for me." She reached out, her cool fingers brushing his cheek in a gesture almost tender. "What I glimpsed in your blood, the purity of your devotion. It disturbs me, tempts me, makes me remember things long buried. Is that so terrible for one such as I, perhaps?" She withdrew her hand. "Immortality is maintained through constancy, through the rejection of change and emotion. These are luxuries I surrendered centuries ago, or locked away," Benio suggested, waiting for someone worthy of them. A shadow of vulnerability crossed her perfect features. "You speak dangerous words, dragon slayer." She turned away, her crimson gown whispering against the obsidian floor. "Rest while you can. Tomorrow the trial begins in earnest." The rite of 7 nights proved every bit as harrowing as promised. Each midnight, Benio was brought to a different sacred chamber within the castle where one of the counselors awaited. Vladimir, first of the council, began the ritual, his ancient fangs piercing Benio's throat with practiced precision. The vampire's blood, when it flowed into Benio's veins in exchange, burned like liquid ice, carrying memories of battles fought before the founding of Rome. Each night brought new agony, new visions, new challenges to his sanity. Serafina's blood showed him possible futures, some glorious, others horrifying, all dependent on choices not yet made. Ibrahim's essence carried the weight of empires risen and fallen, the taste of desert sands and magic older than written language. The Asian counselor Ming flooded him with perfect discipline and calculating patience learned across millennia. The flame-haired Elisar, distant kin to Kaja herself, shared blood that resonated with hers, a foretaste of what awaited if Benio survived. The Ancient One called only the hollow, his humanity long since carved away by time, nearly broke Benio with the emptiness his blood carried. The yawning void that immortality eventually became, and the child-faced Lilith, youngest yet perhaps cruelest of the 7, whose blood burned with betrayals and vengeance collected across thousands of years. Throughout it all, Benio's shadow grew more restless, more independent, sometimes lashing out at the counselors, sometimes coiling protectively around him. The dragon's curse fought against the vampire essence invading his system, the 2 ancient magics wearing for dominance of his transforming body. Each dawn he would collapse in his chambers, fevered and delirious, his veins tracing black patterns beneath his skin. Ilara, the human servant, tended to him during these hours, applying puces to wounds that healed too quickly, and yet not completely, leaving new scars to join those from his battle with Valiax. "No one has survived past the 5th night before," she told him as she bathed his forehead after Lilith's feeding. "Yet you endure. The castle whispers of it. Some say the queen watches over you herself during the daylight hours, though none have seen her do so." Benio, drifting between consciousness and delirium, was never certain if Kaja truly came to him while he slept. Yet sometimes he would wake with the scent of ancient roses in the air, or find the iron rose placed on the pillow beside him, though he had left it on the table across the room. The 7th night arrived, and with it the final and most dangerous feeding. Weakened by the previous trials, his body a battleground of conflicting magics, Benio was escorted not to a ritual chamber, but to the queen's private apartments, a suite of rooms at the highest point of the castle's central tower. There, Kaja awaited him, dressed not in her usual formal attire, but in a simple gown of white silk that contrasted starkly with her flame-red hair. The chamber was lit only by candles, their light reflecting off mirrors positioned to create the illusion of stars surrounding them. "You have endured," she said softly as the guards withdrew, leaving them alone, more than any mortal should have been able to withstand. Benio stood before her, swaying slightly from exhaustion, yet refusing to show weakness. "I made a promise," he replied simply. Yes, your promise. She moved closer, studying the changes the rite had wrought in him. His eyes now gleamed permanently with the golden fire of dragon kind. His skin bore the tracery of black veins like an arcane tattoo, and his shadow had become a semi-eyelid thing that curled around his feet like a loyal hound. You are neither what you were nor what the counselors feared you might become. You have found balance through sheer stubbornness, perhaps. A smile touched her lips, a quality I have come to appreciate. She gestured to a shade draped in crimson velvet. The final feeding is different from the others, more intimate, more dangerous. It requires consent freely given. Benio understood. The previous feedings had been clinical, ritualistic. This would be something else entirely, the true sharing of essence between them. You have my consent, he said, seating himself on the chaise. You have had it since I was 5 years old, standing by that roadside with an iron rose. Kaja's expression softened with something like wonder. Such devotion, she murmured, sitting beside him. Even now, knowing what I am, what I have done across the centuries, still you offer yourself willingly. I have seen into your heart, he reminded her. Through your blood, I glimpsed the woman beneath the queen. The loneliness, the burden of eternity. I do not love you despite what you are, Kasha. I love you because of it. For a moment, she seemed almost human in her vulnerability. Then, with gentle grace, she leaned forward, her lips brushing his throat. This will bond us, she whispered against his skin. More completely than you can imagine. Are you certain? In answer, Benio tilted his head, offering himself to her. Her fangs pierced his flesh with exquisite precision, and the world dissolved into crimson light. This exchange was deeper than before, a complete melding of consciousness. He felt her ancient power flowing into him even as his dragon-enhanced blood filled her. Centuries of memories cascaded through his mind. Her joys, her sorrows, her triumphs and regrets. He experienced her transformation from mortal to immortal, the slow calcification of her heart as she walled off her humanity to survive the endless march of time. And in return, she experienced his determination, his single-minded devotion, the purity of love that had driven him from childhood to this moment. Through his eyes, she saw herself not as the monster she had become, but as the queen she could be, powerful yet compassionate, eternal yet connected to the world around her. When she finally withdrew, both of them were transformed. The black veins beneath Benidio's skin had receded, replaced by a subtle luminescence that pulsed with his heartbeat. His shadow had settled, still separate, but no longer restless, and Kaja's cheeks bore the faintest flush of color, as though some of his humanity had awakened what lay dormant within her. The council will be satisfied, she said after a long silence. The dragon's curse has been balanced by vampire essence. You will neither succumb to darkness nor wither with mortality. She touched his face with newfound tenderness. Centuries stretch before you now, not immortality, but a lifespan to match my own for all practical purposes. And us, Benio asked, what becomes of the blacksmith's son and his queen? Kaja's crimson eyes held a warmth he had never seen before. That, she said softly, depends on whether you still wish to fulfill that childhood promise. From within the folds of her gown, she produced the iron rose, now transformed. Where once it had been crude iron, it now gleamed with a silvery light, its petals delicately articulated, a small ruby at its center, pulsing like a heartbeat. Our shared blood, she explained. It changed the rose just as it changed us both. She placed it in his palm, closing his fingers around it. A fitting symbol for what you offer and what I am at last ready to accept. Benio felt the weight of history shifting around them, ancient magics realigning to accommodate something new in the world. A vampire queen who had rediscovered her heart, and a dragon-blessed mortal who had kept a child's promise against impossible odds. When I grow up, he quoted softly, I'll be your husband. I no longer laugh at such notions, Kaja replied, drawing him close. Though it seems I needed 20 years and the blood of a dragon to recognize what stood before me, a love pure enough to outlast eternity. As their lips met, sealing a bond centuries in the making, the castle itself seemed to sigh around them. In the village below, flowers bloomed out of season, their petals the same deep crimson as the queen's hair. And far above, where stars wheeled in their ancient courses, fates were rewritten for a blacksmith who had dared to love a vampire and a queen who had finally remembered how to love in return. Beyond the window, dawn approached. the first of countless they would witness together. Neither fully mortal nor truly immortal, but perfectly improbably balanced between worlds that had never before found harmony. The iron rose nestled between their joined hands, pulsed with a light that was neither dragon fire nor vampire magic, but something entirely new, something that against all odds might just last forever. I hope you like the story. I invite you to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and follow the upcoming videos.